For as long as I can remember, my life has been entwined with the roar of flames and the sting of smoke. My name is Andrew Cain, and I grew up right at the edge of California's sprawling wildlands. My father was a firefighter before me, and from an early age, I watched him drive off in that big red truck, disappearing into ominous walls of smoke and heat that threatened to swallow whole towns. Whenever he left, I felt a blend of dread and admiration. I never fully understood his job's demands back then, but I grasped one thing. It wasn't just a way to earn a living. It was a calling, one that he bore with equal parts humility and fierce commitment. When I turned 20, I enlisted with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, determined to walk the same path. For over 2 decades, the daily hum of fire station life became my heartbeat. Sirens, pre-dawn calls, nights spent dozing off in gear, and the distinct smell of burnt timber woven into every piece of clothing I owned, these became constants. Through countless emergencies, I saw the best and worst of humanity. Sometimes, I glimpsed acts of extraordinary courage. Other times, I found myself wrestling with the devastation a single spark could unleash. Despite the hardships, I believed I was in the right place, doing the right thing. I was also a person of faith, which might sound odd coming from someone who regularly charged into burning buildings. But when you stare into flames that high and feel the scorching blast of heat on your face, you can't help but sense there's something bigger at work in the universe. I found comfort in prayer, whispering quiet pleas for protection, for wisdom, for a miracle that might spare a family's home. Time and again, I felt God's presence guiding me, especially when the fire was so close I could practically taste the ash on my tongue. Yet, in the last few years, I noticed a shift, both in the climate and in my heart. The fires grew more intense. What we used to call fire season now seemed to last year-round. We'd finally douse one blaze, only to be called out a few days later to battle another. More horrifyingly, entire communities were wiped from the map in mere hours. The devastation went beyond blackened hillsides. It tore through neighborhoods and left families with nothing but memories. I couldn't understand why it was all escalating so quickly. I grappled with questions about climate factors, about dryness, about whether people were to blame. And underneath it all, I felt a gentle but growing doubt. Was God still with us in these disasters? Why did these infernos strike so relentlessly? My doubts nagged at me, especially during the fires of 2025. I can't forget the suffocating orange sky and the relentless waves of heat that seemed to defy every tactic we tried. It felt like we were fighting a living enemy, one fueled by more than just brush and timber. I prayed more fervently than ever in those months, hoping for answers that never quite arrived. The devastation followed us like a shadow, and no matter how hard we fought, we always seemed one step behind. Deep down, I wondered if I was truly making a difference, or if my prayers had become empty words spoken to a sky blanketed by smoke. Then came the morning of January 15th. I was on call with my team, part of a larger task force dispatched to the southern part of the state, where another massive fire raged. We'd been on rotation for days, snatching 2-hour naps when we could, surviving on bitter coffee and adrenaline. The sun rose behind a haze so thick that the world around us glowed a sickly orange, making it feel more like an alien planet than a California morning. Still, we had a job to do. Evacuations needed to be completed, and the fire was approaching faster than expected. Word came around 7 a.m. that a small community on the edge of the fire line was being evacuated. Most people had left, but a few holdouts remained, some too elderly or frail to move quickly, others just too stubborn to abandon their homes. Our team split up to do door-to-door checks. Each time we pulled up to an address, a dull dread weighed on me. Were we about to find someone who refused to leave? Were we already too late? The notion that people might be trapped as the flames raced closer sent my heart pounding. Word came around 7 a.m. that a small community on the edge of the fire line was being evacuated. Most people had left, but a few holdouts remained, some too elderly or frail to move quickly, others just too stubborn to abandon their homes. Our team split up to do door-to-door checks. Each time we pulled up to an address, a dull dread weighed on me. Were we about to find someone who refused to leave? Were we already too late? The notion that people might be trapped as the flames raced closer sent my heart pounding. We found an elderly woman sitting alone in her living room, clutching a photo album. The house was silent except for the distant roar of flames in the hills. She stared at us with tear-streaked cheeks, murmuring that she couldn't leave the only memories she had left. I knelt down, gently assuring her that she could take her precious album and that her life was worth more than any physical object. She finally allowed us to carry her out, and we loaded her into our truck, sending one member of our crew to drive her to a safer location. The wind picked up sharply at that point, whipping dust and embers across our path. I radioed command. "Winds are getting worse. We need to wrap this up now." They confirmed that the fire was advancing faster than predicted. The day felt like it was running on fast forward. We moved to the last house on the block, finding a frantic father herding two small children, trying to salvage whatever he could from their rooms. I told him there was no time, that they had to leave, that nothing was worth risking their lives. He froze, as though torn between losing their home and losing everything they owned. But when the flames surged along the ridge behind the house, I saw the panic in his eyes. He grabbed his kids, and we rushed them to the truck. We might have made it out smoothly if not for the wind. As soon as we tried to pull away, a fresh gust shifted the direction of the flames. Within seconds, the fire line cut off our main escape route. Thick smoke engulfed us, stinging my eyes and making it impossible to see more than a few yards. My radio crackled with frantic voices, but I could barely make out what they said over the roar of the inferno. Heat radiated from every direction. For a split second, I thought we might be done for. I sent up a desperate prayer, "God, we need you right now." But then everything went black. The next thing I knew, I woke into a reality unlike anything I'd experienced. It took a moment to realize that my eyes weren't actually open, at least, not in the usual sense. There was a brilliant radiance, but it wasn't harsh or blinding. It felt warm, as though the light itself carried a gentle embrace. The cacophony of a raging fire was replaced by a profound stillness, yet it wasn't an empty silence. It was as if the very air thrummed with a presence that was both comforting and awe-inspiring. I looked for my hands, my arms, my uniform, anything to anchor myself in a familiar body, but saw nothing. Strangely enough, I still felt more alive than I ever had in my physical form. Every doubt, every fear, every physical ache that had clung to me on the fire line was gone. It dawned on me that I might have died. That realization should have been terrifying, but it wasn't. Instead, it felt like a long-awaited answer to a question I hadn't known I'd been asking my entire life. If this was death, it was more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. That's when I sensed a presence so vast, so loving, that I couldn't imagine ever being separate from it. I didn't see a figure at first, but I recognized what I can only describe as pure love, unconditional, unwavering, and all-encompassing. It was as though every cell of my being was suddenly known, cherished, and welcomed without reservation. I wanted to weep with gratitude, though I'm not sure I had tears in that place. Time lost all meaning as I bathed in that love, feeling whole in a way I never had before. Slowly, I became aware of something else. Out of the corner of my perception, I sensed what looked like flickers of darkness, shapes twisting and writhing. It reminded me of the illusions you see through heat waves, but these shapes gave off a feeling of malice. They were connected to the flames I'd left behind in the physical world, as if feeding on the chaos and destruction. In this new state, I could see a deeper layer of reality, one in which those destructive forces weren't just random. They had intent, and they were thriving on every bit of fear, devastation, and despair. Just as I started to piece that together, the light around me brightened. A figure emerged, a man, yet more than a man, radiating the same boundless love I had felt only moments before. I instinctively knew who this was. Even if I hadn't spent my life praying, I would have known. The gentleness in his expression was enough to make my knees buckle, if I'd still had knees in a traditional sense. I heard him speak, not out loud, but directly into the deepest part of me. He said my name, Andrew, and the sheer kindness in that voice undid me completely. I tried to respond, but words wouldn't form. The presence, Jesus, imparted a peace that was both overwhelming and tender. He let me feel that everything was known about me, all my failures, my regrets, my cynicism, and my hopes. And still, there was no judgment, only love. I wanted to stay in that presence forever, never returning to the scorched reality I had left behind. But he had more to show me. In an instant, the space shifted, and I saw the same wildfires I'd been battling. But this time, I could also see the spiritual dimension behind them. Dark, shadowy entities moved among the flames, almost directing the destruction. The devastation wasn't just a physical event, it was a symptom of deeper spiritual turmoil. Every hateful thought, every selfish deed, every rejection of love had fed this darkness over generations, turning these fires into something far more sinister than mere natural disasters. Jesus communicated that this was part of a larger wake-up call. Not a punishment, but a stark warning that humanity had drifted away from its original purpose of love, unity, and truth. When people prioritize greed, anger, and apathy, the darkness expands, manifesting even in the physical world. The fires were a reflection of a brokenness deep within society's soul. My heart ached at the sight. It felt too big, too systemic. How could anyone possibly stand against such forces? Then Jesus drew my attention to pockets of light flickering here and there. Families praying together, neighbors helping one another, individuals turning away from bitterness and choosing compassion. In those places, the darkness faltered. It couldn't take root where genuine love and faith were present. I asked silently, "What can I do? I'm just a firefighter. One person." Jesus responded that I had a voice, that my experiences were meant to be shared. He told me that the purpose of my calling wasn't simply to fight physical fires, but to shine a light on the spiritual fires consuming our communities. And he told me that not everyone would believe what I had to say, but some would. For those willing to open their hearts, the truth could spark real change. That's all that was asked of me, to be faithful in telling the truth I'd been shown. Before I could protest or plead to stay, everything around me shifted again. I saw myself lying in a hospital bed, paramedics gathered around. The glow of that radiant realm began to fade, replaced by fluorescent lights and the urgent sounds of beeping monitors. I felt gravity return, pressing my body against the mattress. And then, with a sudden jolt, I was back. I opened my eyes to see my wife, Emma, standing over me, her eyes red from hours, maybe days, of worry. Our two kids, Ellie and Noah, hovered by the doorway, both looking terrified yet relieved. The nurses and doctors insisted my survival was a miracle. They said my heart had stopped. They said no one should have made it out of that fire zone alive. I didn't argue. I just lay there, disoriented, struggling to make sense of how I could possibly put into words what I had just experienced. In the days that followed, I tried to explain it to Emma first. I described the light, the immeasurable love, and the vision of the fires intertwined with spiritual forces. I braced myself for skepticism or pity, half expecting her to dismiss it as a hallucination. But to my surprise, she believed me. She told me she could see something in my eyes had changed. She said that, for a moment, I looked like a man who'd glimpsed something truly sacred. Hearing that made me break down and weep. Word spread quickly among my firefighter colleagues. Some were openly curious, some politely nodded but remained doubtful. A few came straight out and said I was delusional. Maybe the smoke inhalation had messed with my head. I didn't blame them. If someone told me the same story a year earlier, I might have struggled to accept it too. But no amount of doubt could erase the peace and certainty I felt inside. I knew what I had seen, and I knew it was real. Once I was out of the hospital, I started getting invited to speak at small gatherings. Local churches, community centers, sometimes even neighborhood BBQs where folks wanted to hear the firefighter's miracle story. Each time, my hands trembled with nerves. I wasn't a pastor or a motivational speaker. I was just a guy with soot in his lungs and a fresh scar on his forehead from that day's chaos. But I told him anyway. About the hidden darkness fueling the infernos, about the love that transcends everything, and about how we each have a choice to feed either the light or the darkness. To my astonishment, people listened. Some cried, saying they had felt a growing heaviness in the world but hadn't known what to do. Others admitted they'd lost faith years ago but sensed something genuine in my story. A few still scoffed or rolled their eyes, and I learned to be okay with that. It wasn't my job to convince everyone. My job was to share the truth, trusting that it would reach those who needed it most. Over time, I witnessed small but meaningful changes. Families I knew who rarely spent time together suddenly started praying or volunteering at shelters. Churches that once felt perfunctory began hosting open-door worship nights, rekindling genuine community. In some neighborhoods, the tension between neighbors began to ease as people helped each other prepare for emergencies, fix damaged homes, or simply share a meal. It was as though a spark of compassion had caught fire in the midst of all this chaos. Only this fire brought people closer instead of tearing them apart. Meanwhile, wildfires continued to plague parts of the state. I wasn't naive enough to think that spiritual awakening alone would eliminate them. But in the areas where communities came together, the destruction seemed more manageable, the response more unified. There was a renewed sense of hope, as if people remembered they weren't facing this crisis alone. The darkness didn't vanish overnight, but it was held at bay by collective acts of faith and love. I'd be lying if I said the journey was easy. Some days, I questioned whether my near-death experience was too bizarre for people to accept. I wrestled with my own insecurities. Why had I been chosen for this message? What if I let everyone down? On those days, I revisited the memory of standing in that radiant realm, embraced by a love too vast to articulate. I clung to that experience like an anchor, reminding myself that my words, flawed as they might be, held power as long as they were honest. Reports trickled in from across the region. People would send me emails or letters, saying they'd heard my story through a friend or read about it online. Some claimed it inspired them to reconnect with family members they hadn't spoken to in years. Others said it led them to question what they truly believed about life and what lies beyond it. It was humbling and surreal. I was used to fighting flames, not sparking conversations about faith and spirituality. But I accepted this new calling, trusting that the one who guided me through fire would guide me through these uncharted waters too. Of course, the darker side of public attention surfaced. A few folks accused me of exploiting my story, claiming I was just another person profiting from sensationalism. Some skeptics online dissected every detail, trying to find contradictions. I understood their skepticism. But as painful as it was to read such attacks, none of it could rob me of the peace I'd found. I knew the truth, and I had no need to prove it. Months went by, and through each passing season, I saw a gradual shift in how our little pocket of California responded to challenges. When new fires erupted, volunteer efforts sprang up faster. People donated supplies and shelters for those displaced. Local leaders worked more closely with churches and nonprofits to address deeper emotional and spiritual needs: stress, trauma, fear. I realized that what was happening wasn't merely about controlling wildfires. It was about healing the fractures in our collective heart. If fear and hopelessness breed darkness, then unity and compassion breed light. My own faith, once riddled with quiet doubts, grew stronger. I woke up each morning reminding myself that I was on borrowed time. Every breath I took was a gift. That awareness brought both urgency and gratitude. Urgency because I saw how critical it was to use my voice while I still had one. Gratitude because I recognized that, by all logic, I should have died in that truck, enveloped by flames. Yet here I was, hugging my kids, sipping coffee with my wife, and speaking words that, strangely enough, people wanted, maybe even needed, to hear. Not everyone who listened made dramatic changes. Some simply went on with life as usual, and that was their choice. But many hearts were stirred. And sometimes, those who initially scoffed came back later, quietly admitting something about the story kept them up at night. In my mind, every small shift in perspective, every moment of renewed hope or kindness, was another ember of light pushing back the darkness. Now, I often think back to the moment I first realized I might be dead, floating in that brilliant glow. It would have been so easy to stay there, safe, free from pain and fear. But if I'd stayed, I'd never have had the chance to speak. I'd never have known the joy of seeing entire communities discover a shared purpose. I'd never have watched my children look at me with a new respect, realizing their dad's job wasn't just to fight physical fires but also to challenge the spiritual ones raging in the world. In the grand scheme of things, I'm just a single person, one firefighter who had an encounter that changed everything. I don't claim to have all the answers to life's mysteries. But I do know this: the line between the physical and spiritual worlds is thinner than we think, and our choices, small or large, feed one fire or the other. We can fan the flames of fear and hatred, or we can stoke the fires of love and unity. We all hold that power in our hands. These days, I still answer calls to help battle wildfires whenever I'm needed. It's in my blood, and I'll never turn my back on it. But my focus has also broadened. When I stand in front of a gathering, whether in a church, a school auditorium, or a neighbor's living room, my message is simple. There's more to these fires than meets the eye, and there's more to each of us than flesh and bone. We live in a world layered with both darkness and light, and every time we choose to honor truth, compassion, and faith, we hold back the creeping shadows. Every prayer, every act of kindness, every moment of selfless courage, it all matters. None of it is wasted. I'm sharing this story with you now because I believe it matters. Maybe you're someone who feels the weight of the world's chaos, climate disasters, social strife, personal struggles that never seem to end. Maybe you're searching for evidence that hope isn't just a hollow word. Or maybe you're skeptical, reading these words with an eyebrow raised, ready to dismiss this as a dramatized tale. Whatever the case, I urge you to at least consider the possibility that there's more going on in our reality than we can see with our eyes or measure with instruments. The fires that ravage our landscapes may be fueled by dryness and wind, but they also symbolize the condition of our hearts. That's why I believe the time to act is now. If my story resonates with you, if you sense even a flicker of possibility in what I'm saying, don't let it end here. Reflect on your own life, your own relationships, your own sense of purpose. Are there ways you can choose love, faith, and unity over fear and division? Even the smallest step in the right direction can spark a change you can't fully predict. A kind word to someone who's struggling, a moment of honest prayer, a decision to forgive instead of hate, these choices add up, forming a barrier that darkness cannot penetrate. I won't pretend it's an easy path. Sometimes, you'll face ridicule or apathy. Sometimes, it'll feel like your efforts vanish into the void. But I promise you, what I saw and felt in that place beyond the physical still echoes in my soul. Every act of genuine faith and love is a ripple in the spiritual realm, one that can grow stronger if nurtured collectively. You might never see the full impact of your choice to be a light in someone else's darkness, but it's real, and it matters. So here we stand, at a crossroads. Fires are still raging in more ways than one. Wildfires in forests, fires of conflict in our societies, even the quiet internal fires of despair that burn inside many of us. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, to shut down, or to become bitter. But from what I experienced, I believe there is always hope. No matter how thick the smoke, no matter how intense the heat, the light that emanates from genuine compassion, faith, and unity can cut through it all. I don't have a grand speech to conclude with, nor a flawless plan to save the world. I only have the truth as I've encountered it. And that truth is this: we are loved far more deeply than we can comprehend, and we are more powerful in unity than any swirling darkness might suggest. If you take anything from my story, let it be that. Let it be a small seed planted in your heart, one that prompts you to ask questions, to seek answers, and to consider the possibility that your every choice shapes not just your life, but the unseen reality that binds us all together. Thank you for allowing me to share this journey. I never thought I'd be telling a story like this, but I've realized it's what I was meant to do all along. If this resonates with you, I encourage you to keep the conversation going. Whether that means talking to a friend, praying for guidance, or simply sitting quietly and reflecting on what truly matters to you. The fires might be fierce, but we have a chance to face them together, armed with faith, compassion, and an unbreakable light. Thank you for allowing me to share this journey with you. If you found something meaningful in these words, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this story. It might spark the very conversation someone else desperately needs. Together, we can shine a light that pushes back the darkness.